is, but it isn't, and that's what I'm going to talk about quite a bit. Okay, so we mine the earth, we extract. And a lot of people use this, the metaphor of mining, to talk about the way we extract from the soil, the way we take water, the way we take, of course, petroleum is a kind of mining. When it's the tar sands, it actually looks just like regular mining, or coal looks like mining, right? And so on. So we mine the earth in all kinds of ways, including water extraction. We're mining groundwater all the time, sometimes disastrously, but that's for another day. Then we have to process that stuff we pull up. Okay, it has to be turned. So what we call natural resources are usually already processed. It is something like iron pellets from the Mesabi Range on Lake Superior, or comes up from Brazil or wherever it is. They don't ship the crude ore; they process the ore, and they do it in what are called smelters. They crush it and they melt off or separate off materials using chemical processes like gold. Gold ore isn't shipped anywhere; it has to be processed, and then you get a gold. You may not get the final gold bar; that may go to another smelter, but you may get a fairly crude gold ore that's been at least preliminarily processed at the mine or near the mine. Sawmills for wood. You generally don't ship logs all the way to cities; you ship wood to cities. Other industries like canning. A lot of our food doesn't come directly to us. It is processed by things like canneries and meatpacking houses. And these are important industries. To this day, these are still big sectors. And historically, they were the most important sectors. That's what's really interesting. Is if you look at the U.S. in 1900, something like 7 of the 10 largest industrial sectors are natural resource processing. They are wood processing. They are things like brewing, which is just taking a bunch of yeast and hops and so on and throwing it together with some yeast. I mean, it's not very sophisticated manufacture, is it? But it's resource processing manufacture. And a lot of the early stuff was exactly that. Okay, energy production, of course, we don't just take our energy, we don't take our coal. We used to take our coal down coal chutes, that's gone. Now we don't even take coal, we tend to take electricity or natural gas that comes through pipes, and that stuff often has to be produced. Certainly electricity has to be produced, and in some cases like hydro, you have to produce electricity in very interesting ways that don't involve burning. Water also has to be produced, it generally has to be cleaned up, pumped up and cleaned up and processed. These are giant factories, these water processing plants. We're not into the sewage plants, but we have 2 or 3 of these in the East Bay Hills just to keep us all going, and they're pretty interesting factories. We don't tend to think of them as factories, but they are. Distribution. The most interesting part of natural resource supply is probably distribution. Again, classical location theory said that industry located near resources. And you did get a lot of industry near Pittsburgh, or like when Niagara Falls opened up, and you had all that falling water and all that electricity generated, huge cluster of chemical industry sat right there. And that was a kind of Alfred Weber location. They got close to their source of energy, because energy transmission wasn't very good then, in the early 1900s. But in fact, today, almost all resources come to you. It comes as electricity over the wires, or gas through a pipe, or water through a pipe, or oil actually travels hundreds and thousands of miles through pipelines, by ship, by train, and so on. So there's a huge resource distribution sector, which is very interesting. I mean, it's very big business because it involves huge capital investments. It's often technologically very sophisticated. If you think of something like running electric distribution networks, and we'll talk about that next time, or even running coal trains and so on, is a huge capital-intensive operation involving so much money wrapped up in pipelines, wrapped up in rail lines, wrapped up in ports and huge tankers and so on. We don't think about it very much, but there's a really important kind of logistics for a very important kind of industry, which is our supply of resources. What it turns out is, of course, because of the distribution system is so huge and effective these days, that most industry locates near this infrastructure, locates near the highways, the railways, the pipelines. So, for instance, we have 4 refineries in the Bay Area, but we don't produce any oil here. And ever since those refineries opened up, there used to be 6, opened up, there's a big pipeline came up from Bakersfield and brought them oil that way, or else the ships come in, as they still do, and bring them crude oil from Sumatra or Alaska or wherever it might be. So they located actually near their market because they could bring the supply, could come in by pipeline or ship from somewhere else. So most of the best resource-served places are the big cities, the industrial clusters, the advanced regions, the advanced economies. Or, for instance, when we talk about industrial parks, why do people use industrial parks? Because the industrial park comes completely equipped with an infrastructure. What's that infrastructure provide? It's providing movement, but it's providing overwhelmingly movement of resources. It's going to bring you your gas and your electricity. It's going to take out your sewage. It's going to bring you water. Everything's going to be done for you, plus roads. Okay? And you don't have to worry about that. You might even not have to build the building. Now, to get those kind of resource supplies turn out to be very important for industries. And industries we think of as not very resource-intensive really are. Take electronics. Take Silicon Valley. Oh, it's all brain power, right? Because after all, silicon chips are tiny little guys, and silicon is basically sand that's been melted down. Take the silica out of it. All right? They do that down on some beach, God knows where. They actually used to do it down by Monterey Bay. I think they stopped doing that. Process it. You get your silica. That's not why Silicon Valley's there, right? It's not near the silica mines. It's there for things like labor. But it may have the labor supply. It may have all the industrial district, all the features of an industrial district. But what does it run on? It runs on electricity. Massive amounts of electricity. Tons of server farms. And when there were brownouts in California in 2001, Silicon Valley went bonkers. You cannot have a Silicon Valley with a crappy electricity supply. You have to have a massive, dependable, ever-reliable, non-failing electrical supply. Now, they're putting more and more of their server farms out in places. Google has a big one now in Eastern Oregon, where they can get electricity, not too many competitors. Of course, land's cheap because a server farm, plop it down. It doesn't really have to be on expensive property in the Bay Area. But it does have to have reliable electricity. And they've been decentralizing a lot of these, partly to get them away from expensive land, but also to get them to places where they can pick up cheap electricity. Of course, such politics goes into this stuff. And every time there's some big new pipeline or electrical facility or solar facility in the desert, there's huge protests and huge battles over this. Keystone Pipeline coming down from the tar sands of Alberta is just one of the latest examples. That's a huge fight going on even as I speak. But there have been fights. The modern environmental movement in some ways got started with a fight over Hetch Hetchy, this pipeline here. Because San Francisco was not going to go without water. It was going to get that water, come hell or high water. So what did it do? Good metaphor. What did it do? It went and stole half of Yosemite. It took the little Yosemite Valley and dammed it up and stole the water. And that was a huge political fight, but they won, as industry so often does. So part of this is not a natural process in which, industry goes to where the infrastructure is. Very often industry gets the infrastructure it needs through political and other means. Just like off-ramps. I always love these off-ramps called things like There's that big one down in Fremont. It's like all the new car, I think it's a new car alley or something, but it's actually, yeah, Auto Row Parkway or something. You see these also Hilltop, I believe there's one of these. And they'll actually have, an exit sign. Caltrans built them an exit just for their auto row, or just for their, some big mall or something. But it also happens for industry. They'll get their own exit. But they get much more than that that you never see because most of it's underground. And markets. Okay, resource supply is also mediated by markets. And where we get markets in these mysterious commodities, especially things like oil going down a pipeline, it's kind of hard to commodify in a lump. You call it barrels, but nobody ever puts it in a barrel. It's in some pipeline or in some tanker somewhere. But it's bought and sold in barrels on commodity exchanges. We have these huge commodity exchanges in all the basic commodities, including food now. Not so much in water, although that is sure to come sooner or later, but definitely in metals and in oil and energy. And of course, you get all the derivatives, the financial derivatives we talked about, so which were originated to stabilize supply. So you could buy, you could buy your wheat ahead of time to make sure you had a supply, or your cotton for your mill. You could buy an option or a future to make sure you had a supply, or you could write a contract. There's a lot of ways you could do this. But as we know, the financial world today loves these kind of pieces of paper and invests in them and speculates in them all the time. Okay, the big commodity exchanges have a geography. They are almost all in London and New York. The oil price is set in the financial centers of the world, which is not accidental, and of course means finance gets its fingers in there. And of course, when there are supply shortages and bottlenecks and price rises are a feature of a resource market, speculators get in there and start speculating for further price rises, or they could hedge for price falls. So when you get these kind of rises and falls, this peak in oil prices that took place in 2008, basically 9 after the financial markets collapsed, hedge funds shifted into commodity markets, and there was this unbelievable spike in oil prices, which you can see here also in metal prices, in food prices, which were driven by the financial theories, as I put here. So financial markets, resource prices are very, very closely tied. This isn't, again, all about the real economy. It's also about finance. Okay, let's talk about some geographic dynamics about the expansion of resources around the world and of resource industries. So, we got 3 categories: resource frontiers, making resources, and the race for resources. This is the extensive resource frontier. Then I'm going to talk about sort of more intensive internal development of resources in developed countries, and then just come back to this kind of modern resource frontier idea. Okay, a resource, where am I? Okay, resource frontier. What happens is that as demand goes up, it triggers price increases, which triggers new searches and discoveries of resources. Technology is obviously a really important part of this. It's not just technology in production, but now we've got a different kind of technology, which is unlocking the Earth's riches. And this is a very important, the development of modern geology at a place like Berkeley was closely tied not just to earthquakes, and not just to looking at the Sierra Nevada. It was searching for oil. And California made some of the first breakthroughs in in deep geology, and understanding this incredibly complex muck that is California's geography. I don't know if you've ever read that book by John McPhee called Assembling California, but California's geology is really a mess because it's been one of these areas that scrapes stuff off the bottom of the ocean over centuries, over millennia has been pushed by the North American plate rust. So it's brought up all this crud into the coast ranges with a lot of mercury, or the old Sierra that have been mostly worn away but had all that gold in it, and so on. But oil also, down deep, very hard to get at, and a lot of technological innovation there. And development of scientific knowledge, which, as I told you before, a lot of modern science does not precede industry. It follows industry. It is a handmaiden for industry, and they work hand in hand. And modern petroleum geology is totally that. It's a whole subfield of figuring out how to figure out where are the oil deposits and gas deposits. Although what's amazing is a lot of this, like these gas deposits in shale that are now being taken out by fracking, weren't really recognized until recently as being major sources. And they've, I don't know how, it's doubled, quadrupled the world estimates of gas resources, but it's huge. So, we can think about like deep sea oil drilling, what a tremendous technology that is, how difficult it is, quite apart from the fact it blows up every so often. It's really difficult to do. You have to have really sophisticated advanced technology, which only has arisen really in the last 40 years to do this really deep. The first offshore drilling is in California, by the way, in the 1940s. Gold in South Africa was difficult to find and to get out and to track without modern mining technologies. And so, uranium, I could come up with a whole bunch of other examples, but moving right along. So, one way in which resources are a classic capitalist vanguard is after you find them, you identify them, you move into the area where they are. And those areas are often inconveniently occupied by peasants, indigenous people, and polar bears. So what do you get? What I talked about long ago when I talked about expansion of markets, primitive accumulation, or basically a global land grab, in which the market moves in and commoditizes land and starts extracting resources. But to do that almost always fundamentally disturbs indigenous people. Some of them end up dead, as here in Peru. And it can be for oil, it could be for soybeans that are taking away the Amazonian forest, or it could be, of course, in the past, things like clearing Indians off the land of North America so that we could both mine and farm. And so that's the birth of the market. It's the same old story. It's been going on since the enclosures in Britain at a hellacious rate. And it continues into the last corners of the earth, whether it's the polar zone, or it's Amazon, or it's inner Borneo, or wherever there are still some people who might be sitting on something valuable. And, of course, following the primitive accumulation and the getting into the area, in come the forces of capital and the state to conquer those areas. There's a picture of the Belgian Congo, tremendous resources taken out of that, making the king of Belgium very, very rich. But it can also be grabbing native territories for the gold in California, or it can be clearing the forest here. That's, I believe, soybean fields going into the Amazon, and so on. But it's often on national territory. Brazil's move into the Amazon is all about consolidating national territory and the nation state. But it's also about resource grabs and resource extraction out of the Amazon, which for centuries Brazil couldn't do anything with, was not interested in. The Brazil that was anybody knew and anything much happened in modern terms, was in the south and in the southeast and a little bit in the northeast in the old sugar days, and not at all in the Amazon. But that became a national project, just like conquering the continent of the United States was a national project, and so on. And this goes on to today, as we know well. But when the resource industries get to the place where they want to extract, all hell breaks loose. I mean, it's already broken loose in some ways as you start to clear. So it's hard to dividing this up analytically, but it often happens so fast it all mushed together. And if you go anywhere they're cutting wood in the Amazon or something, it's just unbelievable rates that are measured by the tens of thousands of square miles per year of forest clearing. Okay, so I think you're familiar with this kind of stuff. But it's a long-standing pattern. They go into a place, discover it, intensely exploit it, then exhaust the local resources, and then go, okay, spit it out, move on. Hate that watermelon, move on to the next one. Spit it out, move on. And this goes back to the dawn of capitalism in Europe and the expansion of Europe. And it's happened again and again and again. Whether it's in Potosi in Bolivia with the European, with the Spanish silver extraction of the 16th century, or whether it's slavery in the Caribbean islands. And there's this great pattern in the Caribbean where the sugar moved from island to island to island as it exhausted each island, both its soil and its forest, because you needed wood to burn to process the sugar. And it actually starts all the way back in Madeira, then jumps to Brazil coast, then jumps to Barbados, then Jamaica, Hispaniola, Cuba, ends up pretty much in Cuba. And so on. Gold rushes were classic, and gold and silver rushes. Okay? You get the silver rush that helps build San Francisco up there in the Comstock Lode. It's all dug out in about 25 years. Bingo, it's over. Then they had another silver rush in Nevada around 1900. That one lasts for barely 15 years, maybe 20. Boom, it's gone. And this happens over and over and over. Timber cutting. They cut New England. That was a little slower, mostly for farming, but also for naval stores and so on. Then they moved in upstate New York. Cut that over by the 1830s. New England was already cut over by the American Revolution, okay, maybe long before. Then they moved in upstate New York with the Erie Canal and all. That's all cut over by 1800. Maybe, no, that's the Erie Canal, maybe a little later, maybe by 1835. Okay, then they move out to the Great Lakes. Cut over Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Boom. That's all cut over by 1900. So where do they go then? They go to the Northwest. The Northwest was such a tremendous forest, it took them longer. It took them 75 years to completely cut over the Northwest. In California, of course, we cut over Tahoe within the period of the Silver Rush. And then we cut over the redwoods were all basically cut by 1970. There was nothing left except like 2%. It's just, that's not unusual. In fact, it's the norm. And it's still going on. I started to put examples, but I ran out of time. I had one article talking about how African wood is being cut over. World fish stocks, one of my favorite. The world fish stocks, there's, I think, 13 great fisheries of the world? I think that's it. We've got one of them here off the coast. Whether it's haddock or it's salmon or whatever it might be, anchovies off Peru, these great upwellings, you've got the great fisheries of the world, and they've just been knocked out one after another since, basically since 1900, some even earlier, but especially since industrial fishing and industrial fish processing around 1900. And now with these industrial trawlers, they just scrape, not only do you wipe out the fish, you scrape the whole bottom off and kill everything around. And kill every fish that was anywhere in the territory. That's why you have these fights over release with tuna and so on, because they just catch everything and kill it, and then keep the tuna. And it's incredibly wasteful, incredibly stupid, but it's the way we do it. And it's incredibly profitable. And then we have TV shows about how adventuresome they are. Making resources. Okay, this is something else again. That there's this long history of the extensive frontier, this expanding geography of resource extraction around the globe, which today goes to the Arctic. I mean, the U.S. and Russia and Canada are just slobbering, hoping that Arctic ice will melt even faster. They love global warming. Because you think I'm joking? Because they can go right in and get the oil and the minerals and fish it out, whatever. They're just all done, get in there. It's just sick, but it's exactly what you'd expect. It's one of the last frontiers of the world. Okay, so, but there is a counterpoint, which is that industrialization also creates resources. It doesn't just destroy them, it also creates them through intensification of resource extraction at home. Usually close to home. Now, there's a general point, but it's especially telling in the advanced countries historically. Less so today, you see it everywhere. So, industrialization unleashes resources. Europe turns out to be the first center of modern mining. It's not surprising. With the rise of capitalism, the first modern mines of the world are opened up in Bohemia, and they revolutionized mining technology. And there's a guy named Agricola who writes about this back in the 1500s. And that became like the Bible of mining for the next 300 years until California miners revolutionized the technology again in the 19th century. And Britain, I mean, of all places, that little punk island, becomes the greatest mining country on earth, mostly mining coal. Although there are the famous Cornish miners and Welsh miners who are extracting things like lead and zinc and God knows what all basic metals all over Britain. So Britain produced a lot of metals as well as coal. Why? Because it was close to the demand, because they had the transport and they had technologies and people and capital to invest to extract the stuff. What is that picture of? Let's see. Oh, I think that's Augsburg, where the Fuggers, the first great capitalist fortunes of Europe, by the way, come out of mining and help launch capital accumulation in Europe. It's not just theft from India or from the Incas. It's also mining fortunes in Europe itself. So while Europe was would very quickly go over to the New World and drag out all the gold and silver and mining through mining, they were at the same time mining the edges of Europe. North America becomes the next great center of mining for 100 years. And when I was a kid, everybody said, oh yeah, the U.S. is the world's mining center because we just are lucky. We just were lucky that this big country that sat on these incredible resources. Well, there's two things wrong with that story. The only thing right about that story is that, yeah, we were lucky to a bunch of white people to land on the coast of this incredible continent and be able to take it over because they had better guns. That was lucky, for sure. But the two things that story forgot about was conquest and elimination of all the people who inconveniently got in your way, whether they were Mexico or they were Indians, or they were the Brits, remember Canada? They wanted it too.